Hello, everybody. Welcome to Yerushalmi Berachos Daf Vav in the Oz V'Hadar print. For those of you that are inclined towards Agadas, there's a lot of it in Yerushalmi, and especially in Berachos. And today we're going to talk about three important people, and hopefully we'll explain two lines in the Gemara, which are very, very interesting, and there's a lot of Mefarshim on them. So hopefully we have a lot to cover, and I will try to get started. So probably one of the most authoritative and famous of the early Mefarshim of the Agadas throughout Shas, which includes Bavli and Yerushalmi, is the Ein Yaakov. That was written by Rav Yaakov. His father's name was actually Shlomo, but they call him Ibn Chaviv. That was his grandfather's name. That was probably like a very famous family name, which got taken on. And he actually published a lot, or started writing a lot of his Purish in the 1500s, about 1516, and then he passed away in the middle, and his son took over. And anyway, there's a large amount that's written on Yerushalmi, which is very, very helpful for Agadas. So he's one important name for, most people are familiar with Ein Yaakov, and you'll see that he's used a lot, and his style has been copied by a lot of people. Then you have someone that really grasped onto Midrashim and really, really excelled in explaining them, and also in the 1500s. You have Rav Shmuel Yafa Ashkenazi. So what you find his name, as the Fei Torah, he uses that Yafa name for a lot of things. And he's very, very prominent in Medrash Rabbah. And that's, remember, we said originally that since, according to many, Rav Yochanan wrote both Medrash Rabbah and the Yerushalmi, so there's a large correlation between them, and many, many Midrashim are found in the Yerushalmi and vice versa. So this person, Rav Shmuel Yafa Ashkenazi, was born in 1525 and died in 1595. So and he is made famous really by the Marsha, who actually quotes him a lot. And so the third person that I'm going to get to, who explains a lot of Agadas on the blot, is actually this sefer over here called the Agadas Eliyahu. This is Rav Eliyahu of Vilna, not to be confused with someone who came a little bit after him, the Vilna Gaon. This is written by a person who died in 1729, and he's very famous for the Shevet Musar, which many people are familiar with. It's kind of like it has an Agadic way of going through Musar, which is very fascinating. Medrash Talpios, which is his Kabbalistic side, which is very fascinating as well, and the Me'il Tzedakah. And apparently he wrote about 30 Sfarim. Many of them I've seen in print, but those are kind of his most famous. The Me'il Tzedakah talks about the Midrashi Agadah about Tzedakah. So oftentimes he picks up kind of the things from, he uses extensively from Medrash Rabbah and Berachos Rabbah, especially the Mefarshim, especially the Fei Torah, who we'll be quoting hopefully today to explain two passages. One quick thing, a lot of people don't read Hakdamas. I actually do. I try my best to, and there's some really, really fascinating things. So in the Hakdama to Agadas Eliyahu, this Rav Eliyahu of Vilna, so he writes about a very big tragedy that happened in his life, and it's an interesting story in itself. You can take a look. In this print, it's on page, where is it? 31. And he says that he had some challenges in his life, and one of them specifically is that he had a dear son who he loved very, very much, and unfortunately this child, who was very young, doesn't call him exactly Yeled Shashuim Rach V'Yachid V'Tov, so I guess very, very precious son, passed away. And he basically writes that he was in a tremendous depression and unable to move around at all. It doesn't explain exactly how long it was, but it sounds like it was for a pretty long time, until finally he grabbed himself and said, I'm going to help myself, and I'm going to start learning Yerushalmi and Agadas, and that was Moshe Chizlev, and he was able to start learning that, and Hashem opened it up, and I was able to, he writes, kind of move on in life, which is really, really fascinating. So take a look there, if in case you want that. I've seen the Maharal's brother wrote a sefer called Sefer HaChaim, and he actually writes about a very similar thing, that his wife and daughter in the 1500s had died in a plague, and he was stuck at home in depression, and he writes a similar thing, that he started learning Agadas and wrote the sefer on Agadas, Sefer HaChaim, which brought him life. And he also says a very similar thing, that the word Agadah is actually the same words of Daiga, and that when a person learns it, it's Moshe Chizlev, and it helps him move forward. So I think one of the pshatim is, obviously it's Torah and it's Mesameach, but also Agadah gives a lot of hashkafa and a way to look at life. And so let's go through a couple of ha'aras. But anyway, I just wanted to share that point with you, because it's a very chashuv sefer, the Agadas Eliyahu, and it's for especially for understanding Agadah of Shas, and maybe not as well known as what I think it should be. So going on Daf Vav and Aleph in the Oz V'Hadar print again, that's what we're going to be following here. So there's two Gemaras I want to try to explain today very briefly. One of them is that the Yerushalmi tells us a very interesting thing. So it says that Eitz Chaim Echad Mishishim Lagan. Eitz Chaim is 1/60th of a gan. Now, I'm not very good at math, but when we hear the word 1/60th, we know that usually that has to do with Basar B'Chalav, with something that's Batal B'Shishim, 1/60th. There was something very fascinating going on here, that the Eitz Chaim is which is the tree, which is right in the middle of the gan. So that was only 1/60th of the whole gan itself. Okay, so let's explain exactly, perhaps, something that's going on over here. So there's an earlier Gemara on Daf Hamad Beis that many of the Mefarshim explain. What he explains is like this: that the way that he interprets this Gemara is that there's two opinions being brought down right here. One of them is that there's this 50-year distance that the firmament spans, and the other opinion is that it's a 500-year distance, which most of us are more familiar with that opinion with these 500s because of the Gemara because of the Bavli, and the Gemara in Sanhedrin as well says that one end of the world to the other is the same from heaven to earth, which implies that it's the same 500-year journey, whatever that means. Okay, and so basically, the way that Eitz Yosef explains our Gemara is that the Brisa is telling us that this tree of life sustains the whole world, which makes sense because to a certain degree it represents Torah. That's what Eitz Chaim is. It's Torah, and that's what sustains the whole world. However, there's a very famous shot brought down. I've seen a few people that bring it down, but it's brought down by the Bnei Yissaschar that basically he says that if you have something that's spanning the entire world, but yet it's only 1/60th of Gan, which let's just say that's Gan Eden, even though the Gemara itself says there's something called Gan, there's something called Eden, which are two different things. But let's just for simplicity say that the entire world is saying that it's Batul B'Shishim to Gan Eden. And what that means, according to the Bnei Yissaschar, metaphorically, is that the entire Olam Hazeh, which we go through, it shouldn't distract us. It's all Batul B'Shishim when it comes to the reward, the ultimate reward of Ruchnius that Hashem is trying to give us. Now, it's interesting because we're kind of using the Eitz HaChaim as a representation of, on the one hand, it's Torah, because it spans the whole world in one shot. On the other hand, we're also saying that it represents the world itself. And that's okay. And in Agadas, we could make those chulukim, but I just want to put that down. So what it seems to be saying is that it spans this 500-year expansion of covering the entire world. And I thought that was just a very, very powerful thing to keep in mind. It'll tie into our second part here. And again, there's a lot more to say, but I'll just kind of give you the Rashi Prakim. So Rav Yehuda is the one that said that the firmament is about 50 years, and the Rabbanan say that it is 500 years. Now, when the Rabbanan say that it's 500 years, they say something very, very interesting. So they say it's the distance is Kishnei Avos Harishonim. It corresponds to the years of the Avos' life. Now, if you do the math, what does that mean? They're saying that it's 500, although there's a problem. So Avraham, we know, lived for 175 years. He was supposed to live to 180. He lived to 100. He lost those 5 years not to see Esav or whatever it was. We know Yitzchak lived the full 180 out of all the Avos, and Yaakov lived 147 years. That's what the pasuk says mefurish. Now, for those of you that are mathematicians, that's 502. Or for those of you that are not mathematicians. So let's just put that on the side for a minute. We'll answer that in a second. But so the Gemara is saying that it's 500 just like their years. Why? Because the pasuk says, "L'man yirbu yimechem yimechem al aretz asher nishba Hashem la'avosechem la'seis lahem." So it's referring to the avos kimei hashamayim al aretz, and that remez of just like what's it called? Like the days of the heaven upon the earth. That's referring to that distance of 500 years that it spans that, which corresponds to avos. So obviously this is something very esoteric being said over here. And I want to try to explain it a little bit. So first, let's just kind of deal with that problem of, is it 500 or 502? So the Haredim here and the Rosh Rilio, who hopefully we'll explain more about them later, so they basically say it's Lav Dafka, 500, 502 is the same. But many others explain that it is Dafka. For example, the Mara Fulda here, if you want to take a look, or the Yefei Mara, also say, based on a Medrash Yomadu quoted in Yalkut Shmoni, it's also quoted in some versions of Tanchuma, which the Agadas Eliyahu brings down, which is that they say, that since Avraham was only Makir Boro when he was 3, so that means his first 2 years of his life he didn't have a connection with Hashem, so to speak, in that full way. So therefore, that's 500 years of their lives that were connected to Hashem. That's one pshat. Chaim Kanievsky brings this down also. He was a great Bucky, and he brings down this pshat as well. There's one more pshat that's brought down. ArtScroll brings this down. They have their Purish is amazing, from Rav David Oppenheim, which I was not familiar with, that he says that the 2 years that Yaakov, a famine that Yaakov suffered before coming down to Mitzrayim, they don't count, which is interesting because Yaakov himself was punished for complaining about them, etc. But and he based it on a Medrash Shir Shirim Rabbah, so he does seem to have a source for that. There's something amazing and beautiful that I want to add here also, in just this whole Gemara, learning out the years of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And remember how I said that Divrei Torah Aniyim Makam Achav Ashir Makam Acher. So this is just really, really profound, and you just see how Chazal really delved into Psukim in such depth. So in Yalkut Shmoni Hazinu, Perak Lamed Beis, it's Os Taf Taf Kuf Mem Gimel. So it's actually darshaning this pasuk of Yesovavenu Yivonenu, which is something that needs to be explained in itself. And it says the following lashon: Achlo ba Avram Avinu olam, before Avram came to the world, Kaviyachal lo haya Kadosh Baruch Hu melech ela shamayim bilvad. Shemar Hashem lokei shamayim. That Hashem was only the king in the heavens because he wasn't acknowledged on earth. Avol mishava Avram Avinu emlicho al shamayim vel aretz, like it says in the pasuk, Vashbiach b'Hashem lokei shamayim vel lokei aretz. And that's what it says. So if we just tie that into our Gemara, realize that it's Laman Yubu Yimechem Yimei B'nechem Al Ha'adama Asher Nishpata Hashem L'Osei L'Besechem Kimei Hashemayim Al Aretz. That it's Gufa because of this Madrega that Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov were Mamluch Hashem on the Adama, which is the whole purpose of Hashem. Which, by the way, this corresponds to the Gemara in Bavli and Berachos, which says that no one called Hashem an Adon. Ayin Sham. There's a lot more to say there, as we see. Just Divrei Chazal have so much depth. But think about what's being said here, because that's the whole purpose here, to be Mamlech Hashem in this world. Agav, that medrash continues. It's a fascinating medrash, and it says that Yitzreinu Kiishon Eno, like his eye, Afilu Bikesh Hamakam Avram Avinu Galgal Eno. Even if Hashem would have asked Avraham for his eye, Haya Nosein Lo, he would have given it to him. V'lo Galgal Eno Bovad Ela Afilu Nishmaso Haya Nosein Lo. Shechaviu Lo Bin Hakol Shenamar Kachna Es Binchas Yechidcha, because that's what Avraham gave for Hashem, which shows a tremendous amount of sacrifice. Derech Agav, just because I'm quoting that medrash, the way I explain Galgal Eno is two ways. Obviously, a person's vision is something that's very precious to them, so that's what it's explaining. But also, there's two more parts here. One of them is Shmir Seinayim, which is Kedusha, which is a way to connect with Hashem. That's what the Medrash is referring to. That Hashem even asked for his eyes, he would give it to him, which is one of the hardest things to give, because Gezel and Arayas, and the second shot is that his eyes is his perspective in the world, that he gave them all to Hashem, and he said, Hashem, you're the only way that I look at this world through your lens. You own my eyes, and you own my perspective in life. And then, lastly, my last Aga part is that you find this exact same Hol Yesod about just giving, about taking your life and giving it to Hashem by Noach. That what do you find by Noach? That he was 600 years when the Mabul started, and we know he was in the table for 1 year based on the Psukim. That's how long it lasted. Not the heavy rains, but the entire ordeal of the Mabul before he exited. And then the pasuk says that he lived for another. He lived to 950, but the pasuk says that he lived for 350 years after the Mabul. So somebody doesn't work there, because if he was 600 when he walked in, he was there for a year. He's 601. Then he lived another 350 years. So then he's 951. What happened to that year? And so again, you see that a person doesn't lose any time off of his life when he's serving Hashem, which is very, very important. You could argue that mathematically maybe his birth date fell out a different way, but I don't think that's correct. You find the Midrashim even say that the time of the Mabul was not Olam and a Minyan. There's a lot to fight back with me on that whole shtickle, but that's why I'm doing this, so that we could have a conversation. So I want to leave off with one last thing on that 500-year point, which is from the Agadas Eliyahu, and it's a very, very fascinating shot, and he brings down. It's a little bit more lengthy, so I'll try to make it quick, but Ayin Sham for the full amount, okay? So it's like this. The famous Mishnah in Avos, Perek Aleph, Mishnah Beis says, Shimon HaTzadik says that Al Shlosh Dvarim Olam Omi, that the world stands on three things, Al Torah V'Al Avodah Gemilas Chasadim. So he has a couple of kashas, and they're very famous. One of them is, why are you saying a number? Just say Olam Omi on these three things. Why do you say three? Obviously, there's a hint to the Avos in there, right? Also, why does he say? Why do you need anything? Why do you need avoda and gemilas chasadim? Everything stands of Torah. Torah is everything. So why do you have these other midos as well? And another kasha is that Shimon HaTzadik says that it's Torah, avoda, gemilas chasadim, but then Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says later that that the world stands. Well, it doesn't say that exact word. It says olam is kaim. It maintains itself. Al hadin v'al emes v'al shalom. So, and that's in Mishnah Yud Ches. So what's going on? What's the difference? And why is it that Rishon Gamliel says that the world is kaim on that, which means seems to be it's preserved, and then the other yet Rabbi Shimon HaTzadik says that the world is omed, it stands on these three things. So again, I'm not going to go through the exact long shot, but it's a brilliant shot and it's worth seeing inside. But basically, al regel achas, what he says is like this: that the avos carry the entire world, but they also individually could carry the world by themselves to a certain degree. And there's a lot to say about that. But basically, we find by Yaakov that Yaakov is Ishtam Yoshev Ahalim, so his midah clearly is Torah, which is the first of Torah, Avodah Gemilas Chasadim. Yitzchak is called Avoda; he was a carbon for Hashem, and Avram is a famous Gomel Chesed, Vayita Eshel Beersheba. Aga, this whole discussion of eights, which is what the Gemara on Hayam and Beis is talking about, also makes a lot of sense that the Eitz Hadas is going to refer to Avraham. We'll come back to that in a second, because he was the one that showed the Das to the whole world, and he was one Vu Omed Aleim Tachas Eitz. He used a tree which might have come from Gan Eden, according to the Zohar, etc. Okay, so then Gamliel says that on the zechus of any one of them, it's kaim. It could maintain on any one of them. So it's true that Hashem wants these three midos to be in the world, and that's what keeps the world going. Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. But even on one of the avos, it's kaim, that they have enough to keep it going. And he explains a lot of things, but basically he says that Eitz Chaim is mahalik chamesh me'os shana. What does that mean? That it's 500 years. So that means that Avraham Avinu himself, who showed the whole world the eitz, he brought everybody under the wing of Hashem, under the shade of Hashem, so that itself keeps the whole world, which is 500 years in length. By the way, if you do you know how long it is to drive the entire world, to go through the circumference of the whole world to drive? So if you drive your car from where you start to where you end, I know obviously you can't because there's water in the way, but technically, so basically if you put 100,000 miles on your car, you've driven around the world 4 times. It's about 25,000 miles. So I don't know exactly how you would define 500 years, because that doesn't really work out mathematically by foot. If you walk, 40 parsa in one day, it would seem like you could actually walk around the world, maybe faster, but swimming, I'm not sure. But either way, so I'm not really sure exactly what 500 years means around the whole world, but somehow that's some calculation. But anyway, the point is that the whole world is standing on the zechus of the avos. And that's a lot of what the Gemara is being Ramis to over here. Ayin Sham, there's a lot more there, and he has a couple of pages on it, and it's really, really fascinating ideas. But that's just a little glimpse. When we learn through the Chazal, there's so much depth and there's so much to learn from it, from every word that they share with us. Take care. Thank you for joining.